He didn't call me his sister, he called me a guest. He didn't call me his sister. He called me a guest. If you've ever stayed silent to keep the peace, this story is for you. Watch closely because every quiet moment matters. And nothing here is accidental. I didn't react right away. That surprised me more than his words. I felt my face stay still, my hands remain folded in my lap, my breath even. Somewhere deep inside something clicked into place. Not anger. Not shock. Recognition. I had prepared for moments like this my entire life, even if I hadn't known it at the time. It was 3:17 in the afternoon according to the small clock above the bar. The reception hall smelled like reheated chicken and strong coffee. Silverware clinked. Laughter rose and fell in uneven bursts. I was seated near the back, close enough to hear but far enough to be overlooked. That was intentional. I had noticed the seating chart earlier. My name had been moved twice. He was standing with two men in rented suits, speaking just loudly enough. "Don't introduce her as my sister," he said, smiling. "She's just a guest." One of the men glanced toward me. Then away. I picked up my napkin and dabbed the corner of my mouth, though I hadn't eaten anything yet. My phone felt heavy in my purse. I didn't open it. Not yet. There was something I needed to see first. Something I needed to confirm with my own eyes. The band started tuning their instruments. A sharp note cut through the room and made several people wince. No one corrected it. That small discomfort lingered. I watched my brother adjust his tie, confident, relaxed. He looked lighter than he had in years. That too told me something. A waitress leaned in and asked if I wanted iced tea or water. Her voice was polite, rushed. I asked for water. She nodded and disappeared before I could say thank you. I noticed how quickly she moved away, as if standing near me too long might draw attention. It was subtle. That's how these things always are. I thought about the phone call from 3 months earlier. How he'd said, "Can you handle this for me? Just until things settle." I remembered the tone. Casual. Assumptive. I remembered agreeing without hesitation. Family does that. Or at least I did. Someone behind me whispered my name, then corrected themselves. I mean, her. I didn't turn around. I focused on the condensation sliding down my water glass when it arrived. I traced it with my finger. Present. The speeches began. People talked about loyalty. About support. About who shows up when it matters. Each word landed wrong, like a shoe on the wrong foot. My chest tightened, but I kept breathing. Fully. Carefully. Years of practice. As applause broke out, I stood and stepped away from the table. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going. I walked down the narrow hallway toward the restrooms, my heels quiet against the carpet. Halfway there I stopped and turned. He was alone near the coat rack, scrolling on his phone, smiling to himself. I watched him for a moment. The man I had defended at Thanksgiving. The boy I'd walked to school. The brother who now found it convenient to erase me. "Can I talk to you?" I asked. He looked up, surprised. Then his face shifted into something practiced. "Sure," he said. "What's up?" I stepped closer. Close enough that he could hear me without raising my voice. Close enough to see the flicker of unease he tried to hide. "You called me a guest," I said. He laughed lightly. "Oh, come on. You know what I meant. It's just, today isn't about family stuff." I nodded. Still calm. Still steady. "Then why did you need me here?" He frowned. "What do you mean?" I met his eyes and held them. For the first time that day the noise of the room seemed to fade. The music softened. The laughter dulled. There was just the two of us and a question he hadn't expected. "You asked me to take care of something for you," I said. "Do you still want me to?" His smile faltered. "Just slightly. Enough." "Of course," he said. Too quickly. "Why wouldn't I?" I tilted my head, studying him the way I used to when he was younger and trying to lie. "Because," I said, "guests don't usually handle important things." He opened his mouth to respond. Then closed it. Behind us someone called his name. The wedding planner waved, urgency on her face. He glanced past me, then back again. "We'll talk later," he said. I stepped aside and let him pass. As he walked away his phone buzzed once in his hand. I didn't follow him. I didn't move at all. I simply stood there listening to the music rise again and waited. That waiting did something to me. It peeled back years I hadn't meant to examine, years that suddenly lined up too neatly to ignore. I returned to my table slowly, aware of my posture, my breathing, the careful way I set one foot in front of the other. A woman I barely recognized patted the empty chair beside her and said, "You can sit here if you like." Her tone carried pity disguised as kindness. I thanked her and remained standing. Sitting felt like agreeing with something I hadn't consented to. Across the room, my brother laughed too loudly. It was the same laugh he used when he was nervous, though few people knew that. I did. I'd known it since we were children, since our mother would raise an eyebrow and say, "That sound means trouble." Back then I'd cover for him without thinking. Now I watched him carefully, noticing how often his eyes drifted toward the door, toward me, then away. An older cousin approached, someone I hadn't seen in years. She hugged me stiffly and whispered, "I wasn't sure if you'd come." I asked her why. She hesitated, then said, "Well, you know how he talks." That sentence landed heavier than the one before it. How he talks. As if this version of me had been circulating quietly, gaining shape without my knowledge. I excused myself and stepped outside into the late afternoon air. It smelled like cut grass and hot pavement. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the parking lot. I stood there, blinking against the light, and felt a dull ache settle behind my eyes. Not tears. Just pressure. The kind that comes when you finally stop arguing with reality. I thought about holidays where my seat was always near the edge. Phone calls returned days late. Decisions made without asking me, then explained afterward as if I'd missed something obvious. None of it had seemed cruel on its own. Just inconvenient. Just oversight. I had been generous with my interpretations. I saw now how that generosity had been used. When I went back inside, I found my purse had been moved under the table. Not taken. Just shifted. A small thing. Enough to make me feel unsteady. I checked inside. Everything was there. My phone. My keys. Papers I'd brought without thinking much about why. I closed the clasp carefully. At the bar, an old family friend sat alone, nursing a drink. He nodded at me. "You holding up?" he asked. His voice carried no judgment, only curiosity. I told him I was fine. He didn't argue. Instead he said, "You always were the strong one." Then he added, almost as an afterthought, "That's probably why he thought you wouldn't mind." Wouldn't mind what? Being erased. Being recast. Being useful but unnamed. I thanked him and walked away before he could clarify. I didn't want his version yet. I needed my own. The speeches ended. Plates were cleared. People shifted, relaxed. My brother avoided my side of the room entirely now. That told me more than any apology might have. He was buying time. He always did when consequences hovered nearby. A woman I'd never met leaned toward me and asked, "So how do you know the groom?" I looked at her, really looked, and said, "I raised him." Her laugh faded when she realized I wasn't joking. She murmured something and turned back to her table. That was the moment it settled fully. This wasn't new. It was rehearsed. Polished. Shared in pieces with just enough people to make it stick. I had been living inside a story someone else was editing, trimming me out scene by scene. My phone vibrated once in my hand. Just a notification. Nothing urgent. Not yet. I slipped it back into my purse without checking. There would be time for that. From across the room, my brother finally met my eyes. His smile faltered. He lifted his glass slightly as if to toast. I didn't lift mine. Instead, I stood, straightened my jacket, and waited for him to decide whether he was brave enough to walk toward me. I stayed where I was, letting the space between us stretch until it felt deliberate. If he wanted distance, I decided I would give it to him properly. I moved toward a quieter corner near the windows, where the noise softened and the light turned dull and amber. My knees ached slightly as I sat, the kind of ache that comes from standing too long and holding yourself rigid. I rested my hands on my lap and waited for the tightness in my chest to ease. It didn't. Instead, it sharpened into something clearer. Resolve, maybe. Or fatigue that had finally stopped pretending to be patience. I opened my purse and took out my phone. The screen lit my face for a moment. I hadn't checked it all afternoon, not really. There were a few messages, nothing urgent, nothing alarming. Yet, still, I felt the weight of what it represented. Years of being the quiet backstop. The one who answered calls. The one who smoothed things over. I had told myself it was loyalty. Now it felt more like habit. Someone slid into the chair across from me. It was my brother's wife, newly so, her expression already tired beneath the careful makeup. "He's stressed," she said softly as if that explained something. "This day means a lot to him." I nodded. I believed her. Stress didn't excuse erasure, but it often revealed priorities. "I know," I said. "I've been helping him for a long time." She hesitated, then asked, "With what exactly?" The question caught me off guard. Not because it was intrusive, but because it was honest. I realized then how little she knew. How selective he had been with his version of events. "Things behind the scenes," I replied. "Things that needed handling." She studied my face, searching for something. "He said you were good at that," she said carefully. "Handling things." I almost smiled. Good at it. As if it were a hobby, not a responsibility quietly handed over and never retrieved. When she left, I felt oddly lighter. Not relieved. Just unburdened of the need to explain. Around us, the room shifted into a looser rhythm. Jackets came off. Ties loosened. People laughed more freely. I noticed how easily celebration forgets those who made it possible. I stood again, my joints protesting, and made my way toward the hallway near the exit. On the wall hung a framed schedule of the evening, times neatly printed. I traced the list with my eyes. Everything accounted for. Everything planned. Except the human cost. My phone buzzed again. This time I answered. A familiar voice asked a familiar question, assuming a familiar response. "Can you still cover this?" he asked. Not my brother. Someone else. Someone who assumed my availability was permanent. I looked back into the room through the open doors. I saw my brother shaking hands, smiling, being congratulated. I saw how easily my absence went unnoticed. Something inside me loosened. A knot I hadn't realized I was carrying. "I won't be able to," I said into the phone. My voice sounded steady. Almost kind. There was a pause. Confusion. Then a quick recalculation. "Is everything okay?" "Yes," I said. And for the first time it was true. I ended the call and leaned against the wall, feeling its coolness through my jacket. My heart beat faster than usual. Not from fear. From the unfamiliar sensation of choosing myself without apology. It felt reckless. It also felt overdue. I remembered my mother once telling me, "You don't have to carry what you didn't break." I hadn't listened then. I had been younger. Eager to be useful. Eager to belong. Standing there now, I wondered how many years I might have reclaimed if I'd understood that sooner. My brother appeared at the end of the hallway, scanning until he saw me. His expression tightened. He approached quickly, his smile gone. "Why didn't you answer earlier?" he asked, irritation edging his voice. Not concern. Not curiosity. "I was busy," I said. "With what?" I met his eyes. "Deciding." He frowned. "Deciding what?" "What I'm responsible for," I said. "And what I'm not." The noise from the reception floated toward us, muffled but constant. Life continuing with or without our private reckoning. He looked past me, then back again as if checking who might be listening. "This isn't the time," he said. I nodded. "You're right." He exhaled, relieved. Then I added, "But it is the moment." His phone buzzed in his hand. He glanced at it, then back at me, something like uncertainty flickering across his face. I stepped aside, clearing his path. "Go," I said gently. "They're waiting for you." He hesitated, then walked past. I stayed where I was, listening to his footsteps fade, knowing something had shifted that couldn't be put back the way it was. I stayed where I was, listening to his footsteps fade, knowing something had shifted that couldn't be put back the way it was. Almost immediately, I felt the change ripple outward, subtle at first, like a draft through a closed room. The laughter from the reception no longer sounded carefree. It felt brittle, forced in places. I stepped back into the doorway and watched from a distance. My brother stood near the head table now, his shoulders tight, his jaw working as he smiled at someone speaking to him. He kept checking his phone. Once, twice, 3 times in less than a minute. That wasn't celebration. That was calculation. I took a seat along the wall, grateful for the chair, for the chance to rest my legs. My hands trembled slightly, so I folded them together and pressed my thumbs into my palms until the shaking stopped. I told myself to breathe. I had done nothing dramatic. I had only stepped back. Yet the room responded as if something essential had been removed. A man I recognized from years ago approached me cautiously. "He's asking for you," he said. Not unkindly. Not urgently. Just stating a fact. I nodded but didn't move. "He knows where I am," I replied. The man hesitated, then walked away, glancing over his shoulder once. From across the room I saw my brother stiffen when he realized I hadn't followed. His face flushed, then paled. He leaned toward his wife, said something quickly. She frowned, confused, and shook her head. I noticed how often confusion followed him tonight, how unused he seemed to it. My phone buzzed again in my purse. I didn't answer. That choice felt heavier than the last one. Silence can be louder than refusal. It leaves space for imagination, and imagination rarely comforts the guilty. A distant relative sat beside me and whispered, "Is everything all right?" "Yes," I said, and meant something different than she heard. She nodded, satisfied enough, and turned back to the dance floor. The band started another song. Couples moved together, swaying carefully, some awkward, some practiced. I watched them, thinking how partnership only works when both people know the steps. I wondered when I'd started dancing alone while pretending it was a duet. My brother finally broke away from the crowd and headed toward me. His walk had changed. Faster. Sure. When he reached me, he didn't sit. He hovered, bending slightly, lowering his voice. "Why aren't you answering?" he asked. His tone carried irritation first, concern second. I looked up at him. I didn't have anything to say. "That's not funny," he said. "I'm not joking." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I remembered from childhood, from moments when things weren't going his way. "People are asking questions," he said. I tilted my head. "About what?" "About things you usually handle," he snapped, then stopped himself. His voice dropped. "Please. Not tonight." There was not apology, not understanding, timing. I felt a flicker of sadness, brief but sharp, like touching something hot by mistake. "I trusted you," he said quietly, trying a different approach. I nodded. "I know. You're putting me in a difficult position." I met his eyes. "I've been standing in one for years." He opened his mouth, then closed it. Behind him, someone called his name again. The wedding planner this time, her smile tight, her clipboard clutched like a shield. He glanced back, then at me, panic creeping into the edges of his composure. "What do you want?" he asked. The question startled me. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because he'd never asked it before. He had always assumed. "I want you to go back to your guests," I said. "They're waiting." "That's it. For now." He studied my face, searching for a threat, a condition, a clue. I gave him nothing. Silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, he straightened and forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "This conversation isn't over," he said. "No," I agreed. "It isn't." He walked away again, this time faster, his confidence cracked enough for others to notice. I watched as he stumbled through congratulations, as he nodded too eagerly, as his phone buzzed again and again in his pocket. I didn't answer mine. I let the silence do its work. Inside me something steadied. Not satisfaction. Not yet. Just a quiet certainty that whatever came next, I would no longer rush to soften the landing. I didn't answer mine. I let the silence do its work. And for the first time that night I stood up, not because I was needed but because I was ready to leave. I walked toward the coat rack slowly, feeling the weight of the room lift with every step. Behind me the music kept playing, cheerful and loud, as if nothing important had happened. That felt fitting. The most important things in my life had always happened quietly. My brother caught sight of me just as I slipped my coat over my shoulders. He excused himself from a small circle of guests and followed, his smile gone, urgency written plainly across his face now. He stopped a few feet away, careful, like someone approaching a loose wire. "You're really going?" he said. "Yes," I replied. Without saying goodbye. I looked at him. I already did. Earlier. His phone buzzed again, longer this time, insistently. He ignored it. "This isn't fair," he said. I almost laughed. Dad, I felt tired. Bone tired. "Fair would have been telling the truth," I said. "Fair would have been calling me what I am." He swallowed. "I didn't think it mattered." "That," I said gently, "is the problem." I reached into my purse and took out the envelope I'd been carrying all evening. It wasn't dramatic. Just papers. Copies of agreements. Notes. Things I had kept organized because that was my nature. I held it out to him. "What's this?" he asked. "Everything I've been handling for you," I said. "Everything you assumed would continue." He stared at the envelope but didn't take it. "You can't just stop." "I already have." His phone buzzed again. This time he checked it. I watched the color drain from his face as he read. He looked up at me alarmed. "Did you?" "I stepped aside," I said. "That's all." "You knew this would happen," he said. I nodded. "I suspected." He finally took the envelope, his hands shaking slightly. "Why now?" he asked. "Why today?" I met his eyes. "Because today you made it public." We stood there in the narrow hallway, years of imbalance settling between us. I felt sadness, yes, but not regret. Regret belongs to people who wish they'd chosen differently. I hadn't. His wife appeared at the end of the hall, worry etched into her face. She looked from him to me, then back again. I gave her a small nod. She deserved honesty even if she hadn't known to ask for it. "I have to go," I said, adjusting my coat. He reached out, then stopped himself. "We'll talk," he said, less certain now. "Maybe," I replied. Outside the air was cool and clean. The sky had darkened to a deep blue, the kind that makes streetlights glow softly. I stood for a moment, breathing it in, letting my shoulders drop. My body felt lighter than it had in years. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed once more. I checked it this time. A short message. Confusion. Questions. I didn't answer. Some conversations don't need responses. They need endings. I sat behind the wheel and rested my hands there, feeling the worn leather beneath my palms. I thought about all the times I'd stayed too long, smoothed too much, carried what wasn't mine. I thought about the woman I'd been when I arrived that afternoon, careful and quiet, hoping to belong. I turned the key and the engine started without complaint. In the rearview mirror, the reception hall glowed warmly, full of people who would keep dancing, keep laughing, keep telling their version of the story. That was fine. I no longer needed to edit myself to fit it. I drove away slowly, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to feel every second of leaving. I arrived as a guest. I left as myself. If this story spoke to something you've lived through, you're not alone. Subscribe for more powerful emotional stories where women reclaim their voice, their dignity, and their strength, one story at a time.